A White House lawyer during Donald Trump's first term, giving us some straight talk, hopefully waking everybody up, that the man who 3 hours ago was sworn in as our country's 88th Attorney General, Todd Blanche, will not be a backstop against any of Donald Trump's impulses and desires and insecurities that this democracy will likely need come the November midterm elections. In that lawyer's words, instead, quote, "We are screwed." As concerning as the future integrity of our democracy is, of our elections, Blanche, now being the country's top law enforcement official, does put America's entire bedrock principle of the rule of law under threat, not just here, but around the world. Frequent guest on this show, Glenn Thrush, reporter in the New York Times, writes this, quote, "Mr. Blanche's confirmation in the pre-dawn hours on Saturday was largely symbolic. As acting attorney general, he could have served indefinitely. But it represented a powerful endorsement by Congress of the philosophy that has guided him under a meddling, demanding boss, that he has a constitutional obligation to execute every lawful White House order, even if it shatters long-standing policy and rule of law norms or contradicts what he thinks is right. Already, we have seen Todd Blanche oversee an abundance of cases be brought against Donald Trump's perceived political enemies. Former director of the FBI, Jim Comey, has been indicted. The FBI is relitigating the 2020 election, trying to find voter fraud that Bill Barr says was bullshit and didn't exist. There's a grand conspiracy case underway in Florida going after the Obama-era intelligence officials who put together the 2016 intelligence assessment about Russia. Todd Blanche was the one in charge of the very, very botched and unlawful release of the Epstein files. He was one who sat down with an interview with Ghislaine Maxwell that immediately precedes her being moved to a low security prison. On Friday, the Trump administration informed Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook that it will be reviving its effort to fire her. And speaking of reviving cases, over the weekend, Trump pushed again for punishing former Olympian David Hearn for vandalizing the reflecting pool, a thing that Judge Jeanine Pirro says didn't happen. It's a case that was already dismissed by her. Guess her box of evidence supporting the dismissal wasn't enough to convince Donald Trump. All of this undergirds a deeply distressing concern. What more will Todd Blanche do in service of Donald Trump now that he is confirmed as the country's Attorney General? The first test of that question looks like it was already put in motion. Here's Donald Trump this afternoon.
The anti-weaponization fund, do you think it's still alive at this point? And are there any options that you're looking at to perhaps...
Well, that'll be up to Todd Blanche. He was our new, and who will be, I think, a great Attorney General.
The dawn of a new, even more Trump-controlled and dominated Department of Justice is where we begin the hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. The aforementioned New York Times Justice Department reporter Glenn Thrush is here. Also joining us, Margaret Donovan. She was captain in the JAG Corps. She's a former assistant U.S. attorney for the District of Connecticut, now a visiting lecturer at Yale Law. And back with us, NYU law professor and legal analyst Melissa Murray is with us for the hour. Glenn, I saw some reporting that a memo went out asking DOJ employees to clap in Todd Blanche today, and that happened. Your thoughts on what the country's in for?
Well, I think what's interesting about it is, let's go back to the weaponization fund question, which is interesting. Donald Trump has not gotten the memo or the two memos that Blanche signed. Actually, he only signed one of them. Which were critical in getting him the two votes on the Senate Judiciary Committee to even get to a floor vote. So Trump keeps reviving this issue of the anti-weaponization fund. Todd Blanche has said it's dead, 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 wrote that in these memos. Here's the problem. Todd Blanche is the architect of Donald Trump's criminal defense strategy predicated on the unitary executive and the dominance of Article 2 of the Constitution. Okay, so when Donald Trump says it's up to Todd Blanche's entire philosophy, the thing that got him into the seat that he's currently occupying, is his belief that Donald Trump has the right to tell him whatever he wants to do. So this then becomes this like Escher, this Escher picture, this cycle of life in which Trump claims that Blanche has autonomy, but Blanche's entire philosophy is predicated on what Trump says. So the question is, what did we go through over the last 2 to 3 weeks? What has been achieved by these 3 senators who held out briefly? At the moment, based on the way that Trump was talking, I would say the jury's very much out.
Speaking of juries and judges, I wonder what you think will be Todd Blanche's line in terms of obeying judges. I mean, on the immunity deal, it's a judge that has said that it's unlawful. You can't represent both sides. It's not a settlement if you are on both sides of it.
Well, I think Blanche has been all over the map on this thing, and the general tenor said during the administration started off in the first couple of weeks when then Chief of Staff Chad Mizell walked into the press room at the Department of Justice and handed us this extraordinary attack on a federal judge who was defying the administration. Blanche himself has been called out in the Obregón Garcia case of not obeying judges. There is an entire practice here of demonizing judges that don't agree with Donald Trump. Now, Blanche has, I think, his red line is legality. But in Blanche's interactions with senators, both publicly and privately, that was what he established as the line of legality. And I think one of the really interesting takeaways from the confirmation process is that every time that Todd Blanche was asked if Trump was doing something that was right, his response was Trump had the right to do it. And if you saw, for instance, President Obama's recent interview, Obama says clearly, I could have done all kinds of things as president to instruct Eric Holder and the other attorney generals to do whatever I wanted them to do. I chose not to do that. So there's an acknowledgement that on the part of Obama and other critics of Blanche and Trump, that it's not so much that you have the right to do a lot of things when you're president. It is the restraint that one shows and the respect for norms and the rule of law that has always been assumed in previous attorneys general that one can no longer assume with regard to Blanche.
Margaret Donovan, I want to ask you about the legacy that he assumes the mantle with. Under his leadership of the department, since he became Deputy Attorney General, more than 16,000 DOJ employees have left the department, including a quarter of its attorneys. He's overseen the termination of hundreds of employees, including agents, attorneys, and professional staff that worked on the January 6 cases and the Mar-a-Lago investigation. He is leading a department that is, as Glenn said, isn't trying to do the right thing. The only line he drew for himself is that he hadn't done the illegal thing. I wonder your thoughts on what that means for the men and women still inside the Department of Justice and the FBI.
I think the combination of former Attorney General Bondi's decisions and now Attorney General Blanche's decisions, I think it will be a legacy of loss and corruption. I think that what the DOJ has lost in terms of expertise and experience and principles and ethics from the people who have left those positions, that is going to take a lifetime to rebuild. The DOJ has lost credibility with the bench. The DOJ has entered into agreements like the Anti-Weaponization Fund that are illegal on their face. To Glenn's point, his comment about legality being the red line, I mean, that case was filed well beyond the statute of limitations and wouldn't even pass the laugh test in any other administration. So I think that the reputation of DOJ, unfortunately, is irretrievably damaged. And to the point about, Article 2 authorities and who's actually making the decisions here, as a former federal prosecutor, when you stand up in court as a prosecutor, I didn't stand there and say, I'm AUSA so-and-so and I represent President Trump or President Biden. I said I represent the United States, and that's what every federal prosecutor represents. And I think that the rank and file are trying to hold on to that. And I do think that there's a lot of principled people left in DOJ, but boy, it sure makes it a difficult job when you have that lack of leadership at the top.
Melissa, Jack Smith said to me that his counsel for people still inside was to stay and do your job until you I think of it as Pac-Man, right? Like until you run into the wall that is Todd Blanche, or any of his lieutenants, and Bobe before him, calling on the department to carry out Trump's political retribution campaign, acknowledging, as Glenn and Margaret have pointed out, that he talks to Donald Trump all the time. He said this: if we have discussions where we talk about a case and whether we're going to charge a case or whether we've charged a case, that's okay. No one else has ever thought that was okay. But Donald Trump demands that, and Todd Blanche has turned the department into that. Like a department full of the United States of America's lawyers, right? They're not Trump's lawyers, they're not Todd Blanche's lawyers, they're the country's lawyers, and they're supposed to be used to punish enemies of this country, to punish the worst of the worst, to punish child sex traffickers and drug dealers and terrorists, and they're now being used very publicly to punish Trump's enemies. What does that do?
Well, at a very real level, Nicolle, it means that the Department of Justice and all of those field offices, the U.S. Attorney's offices throughout the country, aren't doing the basic work of public safety. They're all occupied doing Donald Trump's bidding. And this isn't just an erosion of norms, as Glenn suggests. Like, I actually would take issue with the characterization that this unitary executive theory that gives the president the right to do anything, like that this is somehow uncontroversial or incontrovertible. It is not. I mean, having spent 2 years working on